talk through the run a show, but we're excited to have you. Thank you all for taking your seats. And without further ado.
I appreciate you guys. So the overall goal today, you all know us from different walks of life and kind of objectives and missions, but I want to kind of create some context. And I'm not going to talk about who I am, but more what our mission is as a collective. My ultimate vision and where this came from was about a year ago. My partner Dante and I were in probably one of the darkest kind of moments, really understanding how cancer can really impact our family, the challenges that it comes with, and also from a perspective of where we come from. You know, we don't come from wealthiest backgrounds, we come from a disadvantaged story. And we realize how problems exponentially impacted people based upon their socioeconomic status, whether if they would live or die. And the die side was what happened in our family. And we realized that there was ways you could change that. There's ways you could have better health outcomes, you could have more inclusivity. And we didn't know where we were going to go to get that outcome done. And ended up going to this event called Celebrity Fight Night, focused on raising money for cancer research. And that changed my life. And thanks to Gateway, we came to them with a vision. And we said, hey, how can we make a difference here? So we raised a couple $1 million and started focusing on how do we fund trials that are inclusive, how do we change the status quo in the industry. And those conversations are what you're going to hear how we do that today. And how do we also not only create great impact, but create a platform for innovation while helping people. So you can do that in the private sector, you can do that through federal partnerships, you can do that from philanthropy to venture capital. But when you bring them all together, that's when the magic starts to happen. That's when things start to build and grow. And it's been beautiful to just see this all come together. So thank you all. I'm gonna have the speakers start to come to the stage and grab your seats. And we'll start from here over. Heather, Andu, please come on up. I'll just meet Doug. Yep, start some more line. So the conversation today is going to go across the gamut. So each one of these individuals is extremely experienced in their own individual category and thinking about not only, hey, let's fund trials, but while you're in those trials, where do we collect the data? What does it tell us? Where's our opportunity? And as we're raising the money and you're bringing those resources in, who we seek it from? And when we seek those partners, where is the value beyond the dollar? Where is the relationships? Where is the execution come in? So we're going to go through that entire conversation, but I'm going to start off by allowing each individual to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their story, and then we'll jump into the conversation. So I'll start with you, Heather.
Hi. Hi, my name is Heather Gray. I'm the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Real World Data and Clinical Trials at Omega Healthcare. I lead what is called the Omega Curate IQ business unit, and essentially what we do is we take all the mountains of health data that exist in this world and we structure and curate and clean it so that it can be used for research. We also work on staffing for clinical trials in order to help understaffed clinical trial sites with entering their clinical trial data, pulling it from the electronic health record, entering it into the EDC, as well as the data governance and protocol management for clinical trials. And so essentially the work that we're doing, two main goals: improve patient outcomes by giving better access to data and better access to usable data, and improving the reach of clinical trials and the ability for more cancer patients to participate in clinical trials by helping sites with staffing burden.
Hello, my name is Bandy Bayan Paisley, and I am the Senior Manager for Strategic Partnerships at VentureWell, the group that manages the ARPA-H Investor Catalyst Hub, where I'm the network lead. I'm essentially charged with building a network of organizations, including healthcare, research institutions, venture capitalists. We've got academic research institutions all coming together to lend to ARPA-H, which is the newest federal agency's mission to improve healthcare for all. So ARPA-H is an agency that is under Health and Human Services and NIH, but is not an institute or center. It is a completely kind of separate agency that's looking to move healthcare innovations along much more quickly. And so our hub, based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, along with the Customer Experience Hub, which is based in Dallas-Fort Worth, is looking to add organizations that will actually not only inform ARPA-H programming, but looking to help them carry out their programs by becoming funded performers. And so happy to be here and happy to contribute to this conversation.
Hi, my name is Samik Roy Chowdhury. I'm a physician and scientist from Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. My mission is to beat cancer. And so we use research, clinical trials, new ways to classify cancer, new ways to name cancer. And we get the hardest cases that come to our hospital, and our job is to try to figure it out. And we're not winning. And that's why we're here today to talk about what we need to do differently in terms of how we attack cancer, how we build these hubs and spokes. We certainly have opportunities where we win, but we need help. And so hopefully we'll define some of those problems. Every problem is an opportunity, and hopefully together we can identify some of these problems. And honestly, we all know someone fighting cancer right now. I'm a physician. I've got many patients going through treatments. But these are our family members, our friends, our loved ones, our parents, and so I'm glad you're here today, getting through the traffic, the security checkpoints to be here. This is so important. So I'm grateful that you're here, and we'll get a chance to talk more about cancer research and what we can do better. That's the problem.
Good afternoon. My name is Doug Johnson, and I'm honored to chair our Tiger 21 community in Colorado. Tiger 21 is a peer learning community founded 25 years ago for successful founders, entrepreneurs, and executives to really answer the question, what's next? All of this success has been created for the sake of what? How do I make an impact? We've all been touched by cancer. How do these resources work together, both philanthropically and investment, to make the impact that's aligned with my values and the outcomes that I want to see? And so that's where I'm here today, is to talk about the role of the family office in blending philanthropy and investment to leverage the expertise, to leverage the research, to leverage the federal funding to advance the most promising of these therapies and treatments as fast as we can.
And the overall goal here at the end of the day is not just to educate, but to empower. We want people to be able to gain access to the resources, because that's what we are, as a resource. And that's what iiCare is really all about, and it's created by immersion. And our whole focus is around advanced research, innovation strategy, and just really bringing these great people together. So I'm going to dive into that. And one of the biggest things is, Samik, you were just talking about cancer research in the space and innovation all coming together. When you think about cancer research and innovation in the space, why do you think this is so important? You said that keyword is so important. Obviously, it saves lives, but there's more to it than just that.
We're trying to change the way we diagnose and treat cancer. Cancer is ourselves, right? It's part of your own body, and it's growing, and it's invading, and we need to figure out why. And so the research in the past 20 years has helped us pin down that everyone's cancer is different. So we're trying to personalize treatment through research, and that has its own challenges, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But we need to personalize treatment for cancer, for all cancer types. Lung cancer or breast cancer are good examples. Those are not the same diseases. You can get 100 patients with breast cancer, they're different. And we're starting to figure out how to classify and tailor treatments, but there's an uphill battle. The financial incentive to do that is nil, right? And so imagine 100 patients with breast cancer, each one completely different, needing a different treatment. How do you incentivize drug development and investment to do that? I'll give you an example of pancreas cancer, something that we're trying to do right now. We've discovered that 1% of pancreas cancer, so 500 patients a year in the US, about 5,000 worldwide, out of the 60,000 diagnosed in the country this year. How do we develop a drug for 500 people? No one wants to do that, to be honest. But in my closet, in our research lab, we know the answer. So if your loved one has that 1%, we can't do anything about it. That's our problem, right? And so to shift this view from a one-size-fits-all view of cancer to a personalized genetics and other marker-based approach, we have to change our incentive model for this. And how do we justify going after 500 patients a year and helping them? That's the problem we face as researchers. We know the answers, we know the clues, we can put the dots together, we can figure out what to do, but no one wants to fund that. And I'll talk a little bit later today about how we're trying to do that, and so grateful for Gateway, the foundation, to support a new trial for pancreas cancer. The goal of this trial is for pancreas cancer, but I think our bigger goal is to show others how to do this, and to show pharma that you can do this, and it can be worthwhile from that investor perspective. So there's so much to do, and again, I want to present a problem to you today, and a problem that needs help, that needs innovation, and it's an opportunity.
Yeah, and a big piece of what you just said there is around the solution can be there, but if it's not allowed to touch enough lives, it's how to commercialize. And commercialization is such an important perspective of what we talk about every day, because technology readiness levels and efficacy and analysis is there, but if it costs $1 million per treatment, how long can it last, right? So how do we better commercialize? How do we better create solutions at scale and get more people to answer the questions, right? Like if there's a problem that can't be solved by one, it can usually be solved by many. And that goes into inclusivity. So we talk about cancer health disparities is a big piece of this, because even now when you personalize, there's more things to personalize than just the cancer. It's the genetic biomarkers, it's where they're from, what they eat, what their history was. And a lot of times trying to get that diversity in research can affect outcomes and findings. I'd love to talk a little bit more again, Samika, on this question is like, how does diversity or lack of it impact your work, and what needs to change there?
So to give you an idea about the diversity that we have in cancer research, about 7% of patients with cancer participate in some type of clinical study. And that's overall. If you're white, that's 7% participation. If you're black or Latinx, that's half of that. And it's just a couple hundred people out of that fraction that I just explained in a weird way. But it's not enough. So when I meet a patient who's of a different background, I don't know enough about their cancer because it's not reflected in our research. And so how do we engage all communities, all backgrounds, and how do we offer them trials? And so in order for you to be in a clinical trial with me at Ohio State University, you've got to come to Columbus. And not everybody is going to travel to Milwaukee or Columbus. And so there's a number of barriers that exist for that engagement, for that participation. And I recognize that as a problem for 50 years. We know that's been a problem, and we haven't been able to solve that problem. Again, another opportunity. How do we create access? How do we produce engagement from all communities, all backgrounds?
And Heather, you had extensive experience, especially in the data side, and also your experience in trial sites throughout your career. What do you think about the diversity and access component, and what have you seen be successful in that?
Yeah, so actually it's interesting that recently the FDA has started to mandate diversity in trials, right? I've worked on trials with top 10 pharma companies that they've gone for their drug submission and had it rejected, and the FDA has said you have to redo this arm of the trial with X percentage of diverse patients. And so they're essentially starting over with a new patient population, and that's tricky. As we talked about, the sites that you have to go to in order to participate in a trial are not always convenient. And in particular for cancer patients who are not feeling well, don't want to leave their family, and want to be with a physician that they trust, right? And so bringing trials out to the community in whatever way that we can has become key to diversity in trials. And I think whether we're decentralizing the trials, whether we are empowering community sites to run clinical trials, whether we're partnering and doing a hybrid approach of that, where we have the large academic medical centers essentially as the PI with the community sites as the sub-PI, and we're doing it both ways. Whatever we can do to bring these trials out to the diverse population, we have to do. And it goes beyond just these pieces of who, from a cancer site perspective, is running the trial. It's the logistics, it's the transportation, it's the home internet for telehealth, or the ability to have a phlebotomist come to the house. Is that service even available in that community? And it's up to us as healthcare leaders to start to solve these problems so that we can see diversity in trials and really create drugs that impact every member of our community and not just parts of our community.
Yeah, and the thing is, decentralization is key, but another thing from my perspective is comms, right? So like when you communicate with the community, you don't use the same tonality, the same language in every market. You have to customize and tailor it, because I know that even we were at an event recently, I won't even say the name of the title of the event, but they were like wanting to get minorities to be able to gather, and the title alone, I was like, they're not coming to that. So no, realistically, I'm like, okay, how do we do better? And get the people who you're trying to serve to be involved in the conversation and understand what their needs are and their gaps are. Because if I'm in the communities where I grew up, the only saving grace I have is my church. So why not be the entry point to the community? So just really thinking about decentralization, not only from a healthcare perspective, but from a human perspective, right? And we're big on human-centered design. If you don't study human-centered design and you're in innovation, let's change that, right? Because that is the key that we've seen work. So let's go into that, and I'll go back to you, Samik. With decentralization, it's got great intents, and we have really good goals, but there are things that can make that difficult, IRB and other things. What are some of the current barriers that make decentralized a challenge, and what needs to change? What could we work towards to make that easier to be able to do it while being compliant?
Raise your hand if you've done a doctor visit by telehealth. Okay, so wouldn't it be cool or amazing if you could get novel cancer treatments through telehealth and not have to travel to Texas, to Ohio State, or Boston? That's the vision. That's where we need to be, and we are not there. And we are not there for a number of reasons, many of which are simply because we just haven't done it yet. There's like 9 layers of logistical barriers that are stopping us from doing this. The infrastructure that we've had for 50 years for clinical trials isn't ready for this yet. And our mentality isn't ready for this yet. It's too hard, it's too complicated. How are we going to sign off on physicians in other states? How are we going to have a review board review the study for, we have the same study at Ohio State, but we're going to offer it elsewhere. So let's have 50 more review boards review the same damn thing. Like, why do that, right? And that right now, that's the model. That's what we do. Everything has to be duplicated. The administrative glut is ridiculous. So every regulatory document, every IRB document, we have to have a handbook for a pharmacy to distribute a novel drug, right? And we have to get approvals to ship it. And I can ship it all the way to the edge of Ohio. But if I want to ship it to a city on the border of Ohio and Indiana, that's a whole other game. That makes no sense, right? And so these are the logistical barriers that are really solvable. And we have clinical trials offices at every academic institution, as well as community practices that deal with these things, and they're not equipped to solve it. And honestly, we're not being creative enough to solve it either. So this is a huge opportunity. Again, you heard my vision. This is the vision Kate Bay came up with about 4.5 years ago for decentralized trials. COVID came along and showed us that we could actually do telehealth very easily. Right? And we're doing it routinely now. But I think the barriers are solvable. It's just an opportunity waiting for someone to solve. And so there are a couple investigators, two funded by Gateway for Cancer Research, including our team at Ohio State, doing that. So if you have pancreas cancer, you're that 1% that I told you about with a specific gene in your pancreas cancer, you can be in any state. You can reach out to our team. We can offer you our study. We'll make sure you're eligible and it's safe to do. We'll get you qualified through screening tests that your local doctor helps us do, blood work and scans, an eye exam as part of the study. We ship you the drug. I'm currently navigating several layers of how do I ship the drug, which is a pretty dumb question. We need to get all sorts of permissions to ship very simple things, which, by the way, is the routine practice for oral cancer therapy. We just ship it to you, right? That's a normal thing. But now that it's an investigational trial with an approved drug already, it just becomes a headache. These are all solvable things. And so I want you to be part of this vision that Gateway has for decentralized trials. Gateway was the first to do this before the pandemic, right? This was the idea. And I saw it happen during the pandemic. You've all done telehealth. I've given complicated chemotherapy through assessments via telehealth. I realized that, hey, we can do this. So I really want to impress upon you that this is an opportunity that is fixable, right? It can be done. It just has to be done. And again, there's a couple investigators already doing this. But the rest of the world, the rest of our cancer centers, our academic centers, our cancer programs, the NCI, they don't realize that we can do this yet. They want to, and they're talking about it, but they're not putting their money where their mouth is to do it. And so once we accomplish this together, I think this could change the landscape of how we develop novel therapies for patients anywhere. And I think this solves a lot of access issues. I've never met a patient come to me for a clinical trial who didn't come with a family member, right? Someone has to take you to your appointment. Someone has to listen to all the gobbledygook that comes out of my mouth, right? Because that cancer patient, it just needs someone to support them. Whether it's driving, listening, repeating what's happening, writing down appointments, writing down instructions, it just doesn't happen like that. And not everybody has that. And that's another barrier that I don't think decentralized trials completely solve, but at least it lets people not have to take time off from work or worry about childcare. They can do appointments remotely. I could go on and on for this.
Oh, I got more questions. So I think
I'll pause here, but there's such an opportunity to help people here.
Yeah, and I think another thing you said there, which is something that's important or relevant to the current week, is this is how you make informed policy decisions, right? Is when you match industry and policy, because a lot of the regulatory requirements require policy change. So that's something that I'm hearing from this conversation. We need to figure out what policy leaders need to be involved in this work to know that the need of change is there, and then you can start to create it. Heather, when we start thinking about the data side of things and you're doing decentralized care, that's a really big concern for a lot of people. And I'm assuming the way they collect data in the field is probably different than how you do it inside of a closed facility. So how do you do the data side of decentralization? And is that something that is going well now, or is there still challenges there?
Oh, still challenges. So let's just start right there. Like, that is not perfected in any way, shape, or form. But I think the key is that you're using one EDC, electronic data capture system, across the trial. And if you have sort of the mobile nurse or the local nurse who's visiting the patient, entering information either into the EDC directly or into the EHR for the clinical trial site, you can keep all of that data together. It does need to be more closely monitored, though, in terms of ensuring that the data is entered in a timely fashion and that you're staying compliant with data entry guidelines and timelines. That is a really fast way for a trial to fall off track from a timing perspective, is lack of data entry. And it's manual and it's tedious and nobody likes doing it. And so solving that problem right out of the gate when you're talking about a decentralized system is important. So however that trial is set up, and it will be set up from a database and EHR system, differently based on every site. However that is set up, that needs to be addressed right out of the gate at the beginning to ensure that people in the field are entering and keeping that data up to date.
Absolutely, and you know, this kind of segues into the next topic, and we start thinking about why is there gaps in funding in this type of research, especially in cancer health and its disparities. And a lot of times it's outcome measurements. You know, anytime somebody's putting money out, you want to be able to see where does it go and what impact does it make. And if it's not a direct return in terms of the capital gain, there's a social gain. How do you measure that? Mandu, when you think about programs like ARPA, and the different things that you're setting up from a federal perspective, why is there some gaps in funding, and how have you guys solved for those funding gaps? What role does ARPA play in that?
That's a really good question. I think, biomedical research, particularly in this country, is highly competitive. And just the nature of how we pursue our goals in the lab and outside of the lab are very competitive, right? Which leads to silos, right? It leads to us developing something that might be amazing in one area of the country that someone in another area of the country doesn't know is also being developed, right? And so instead of being in competition with ourselves as Americans, I think we realized that, I think we are actually in competition with other nations, right? To innovate at a certain speed and at a certain level. And so you're seeing the trend in federal programs for these hubs. You're seeing it with tech hubs, you're seeing it with ARPA-H. So ARPA-H with the health focus has really tried to think of ways that we can foster a collaborative way of looking at biomedical and healthcare innovation, forcing folks to think about funding not just in that competitive way, but thinking about how could we, yes, get this money together, but also solve this larger problem together. And so you're seeing that, after you saw the passing of the CHIPS Act, really folks thinking about ways that we could work together. Because us competing for the same funds and yet not sharing, I think we were talking about this earlier, our failures with one another, not sharing access to certain communities that maybe we're hoarding, and not sharing those with other folks is really just leading to our own collective demise. And so some of that is a cultural shift that you have to see, again, in the funding agencies, in your Department of Defense, at NIH and others, to really dismantle the idea that we're competing against each other at these academic research institutions and also at larger healthcare systems, and really start to foster collaboration. So ARPA-H, thinking of this approach, formed ARPANET-H and created the Investor Catalyst Hub, again based in Cambridge, and the Customer Experience Hub, which is more clinical trial focused, based in Texas, but then requiring that there be spokes to those hubs that are all of these organizations throughout the country. Global diversity was very important. Access levels was very important. And again, forcing like some of the larger institutions that folks think are more stereotypical recipients of federal funding, forcing them to work with organizations and smaller institutions, startups, VCs, folks that have not necessarily been players in the federal government game, really, because folks learn that you can kind of learn how to receive that funding, right? And the folks that are good at getting the funding keep getting the funding, right? And so kind of steering away from that model and thinking about what are these larger questions that we can answer, surely on the cancer front, but other areas as well, that are going to require nationwide participation, is the approach I think that ARPA-H is taking, that contrasts a bit with other agencies at HHS and other government agencies.
And it's super key, because what we talk about is the ecosystem of success, right? That's the deciding factor of greatness in any organization. And any trial is essentially a startup that is looking to seek funding and create sustainability through efforts. So I think that it's super important as collaborative energy, because I know that even when you think about lifting up communities that had not had stuff in the past, there's brilliant people there that just can't get access, that could solve the problems that we have, but they just weren't included in the conversation. It's been great to see that change, because by us being a testimony to that, to bring these people together, we benefited from this. Like 6 months ago, I knew nothing about clinical trials. I've not worked in a hospital, just sat in one. And now it's just been exponential learnings because of this collaborative energy. So how do we give that to more people? But then protect ourselves from some of those in charge, because one thing I want to ask you to make is there's gaps in cancer funding and research funding in general, but Big Pharma is the biggest companies in America. How do they play a role in this funding? Is it a good or a bad relationship? What does the pharmaceutical role play in research funding?
That's a loaded question. You know, when it's a small startup or a mid-sized or big fish pharma, they all have one kind of guiding principle: the shareholder, right? And I think when you define the mission that way, they have a mission statement that says other things, but that's what guides their decisions. And so this new model with ARPA, which I'm learning about today, is really neat. It's a big problem, and how do we solve it? There's no shareholder that we're answering to. We're answering to the people. We're solving a problem that people face in healthcare, whether it's access to a trial for cancer, whether it's a better way to monitor blood sugar, better way to treat dementia. And I think if you create that mission statement, and that's the answerable, I think that the money will flow towards the right problem. And so my interactions with pharma, which are many, to do the trials that we try to do, always run into that. And I'll give you an example. We discovered a genetic marker, also very rare. Again, that's our problem with precision oncology. Everyone's cancer is rare once we define it. And we might be able to figure out who's going to benefit from an immunotherapy that a big company called Merck makes. Oh, you're recording this, great. Okay.
We'll get that.
Now, they're not incentivized to not give this drug to everybody, right? So right now we give this to everybody with lung cancer and everybody with kidney cancer, but what if we knew who was going to benefit and who was not going to benefit? Right? It's important to know who's not going to benefit, because you don't waste time, you move on to something else. And so partitioning who's going to benefit is not a reward that pharma wants to see, right? And that's just sort of, because that's the model, right? They don't say that. They also don't want to support research in that direction. They might not even share research in that direction, right? So we need a personalized treatment, but it's at odds with how we develop drugs, and it's at odds with how we invest from that pharmaceutical pool of funding. But I think other opportunities, ARPA-H is a new model, which has a different mission and incentive, and then philanthropy. You know, in my experience as a cancer researcher, philanthropy doesn't have that guiding principle. That the philanthropy model is, how are we going to help the patient? How are we going to help more patients? It's patient-centric. So I think I can't underscore how important philanthropy is, and other models that are funding research in a different way. For example, you're not going to find a lot of NIH-funded research addressing what you told us today, which is when you name an event the wrong thing, you turn off your participants, right? The people who didn't come to that event. And no one's studying that, right? We should be studying that. We should be studying communication and trust, right? If you're going to participate in a clinical trial with this guy, with a therapy I think is good for you, you have to trust me. And if I don't know how to connect to you, and not everybody does, you don't all have that gift, but maybe I don't know how to connect with somebody from Vietnam. Maybe I don't know how to connect with somebody from a different background than me, right? And that's my disadvantage. But no one's teaching you how to do that. There's no resource to do that. There's no research to solve that communication and trust. And I think that's another gap, potentially, that we could talk about today.
And now we're in the funding conversation, Doug. You know, you've taught me a lot in the philanthropic space and family wealth space, and we start to think about what motivates the mind of a high net worth individual after they've achieved their great exponential exit or whatever it is. What is my legacy? What is all of that? And you've done some amazing things in Colorado. I want you to speak to, how do private funders make their decisions to fund initiatives like this when there's no capital gain? Or what is the incentive that they look for?
So that's a great question, and I'd like to address specific opportunities that have been presented here. And so when you think about the family balance sheet, I'm looking at my balance sheet, my investment side, and I'm looking at my philanthropic side. And oftentimes I'm approached by folks seeking funding for exclusive pieces of that. I look at a family office and I think deep investment pockets, I'm going to go for investment. Whether it's venture, whether it's private equity, whatever it might be, I'm going to go for that. And I don't even think about the philanthropy. Or I only think about the philanthropy and I don't engage that there might be some for-profit opportunities, some investment dollars there. So I'm not thinking holistically about the family office when I'm approaching them for funding. So as a family office, I'm often shown discrete opportunities and not the whole picture. And so we're hearing very holistic needs here. And so let me give you 2 examples of success out of Colorado that we've seen. Number one, it came from the pandemic. When schools shut down and we moved to remote learning, you quickly see in your community, and primarily underserved and disparate communities don't have reliable internet service. And so they couldn't participate in online learning. And so private funding, family office stepped in and provided mobile hotspots to be able to facilitate online learning. Well, can we do the same thing for telehealth and for clinical trials? What a great opportunity. In addition, then, let's talk to the investment side of the family office. And how do you participate? Can we participate along the entire spectrum from seed, pre-seed, match to some of the federal funding, non-dilutive funding that I can get milestones for my investment dollars that are non-dilutive on the capital stack, and move these things forward and then have the follow-on investments for Series A, Series B, Series D, whatever it may be, and leverage my relationships in the corporate and strategic world for outcomes, potential buyers, taking it to market. And so there's this whole wealth of opportunity here that often goes untapped because I'm looking for discrete solutions. And in addition, when you look at like ARPA H funding or any kind of federal funding, as it should, as a taxpayer, comes a lot of strings of accountability. A lot of the applicants who have promising technologies and cures don't have the infrastructure to do the accounting and to facilitate that grant. And so from a family office perspective, I've got an opportunity to pay for the accounting and the infrastructure that allows my community and my community partners to go after some of these significant grants and have that accounting infrastructure so that we can show results.
And a lot of that comes from really me being someone that's been involved in venture capital space. There's this thing that happens when you just have a bold idea, and it's this goal of just taking off and running, but there's these barriers in place, primarily financial or access that kind of slow you down. And once that is removed, it creates this catalyst effect. And that catalyst effect is largely in family offices, or you can go to federal funding, or you can even go to pensioners, etc. But I think from my experience, there's less strings with family offices, so it's a really good starting point because you now have the ability to have the freedom and autonomy before you have those stringent restrictions placed on you. Something that you learn if you ever had a startup go from small business or mid-sized market to enterprise, and all of a sudden, if you've ever closed an enterprise client, my God, talk about bureaucracy. The word procurement gives me PTSD. It's tough. So you just have to think about infrastructure strategies, and that's what you get with that type of partnership. So let's talk a little bit more about the other piece, and then Daniel, I'll go back to you. When you look at ARPA and the overall goals, and you look at the consortium model, hub and spoke model, when you're picking those partners and those nodes to create that ecosystem of success, which is Investor Catalyst Hub, What makes you choose them? What are some of the things that people need to have prepared, and what are some of the benefits of being a part of it?
Yeah, great question. I think initially we tried to look for organizations that maybe had not engaged with the federal government or had some difficulties engaging with federal funding, prior. It was not very difficult to get the larger academic institutions. They saw ARPA-H and they, immediately joined just for the potential, right? Just for context, ARPANET-H, the two hubs, were launched officially in September of 2023. So very new network. And ARPA-H is a little over 2 years old, so still the startup of the federal government. And so a lot of the excitement and around joining really is around the potential of what the agency can do, modeled after what folks saw with DARPA and the creation of the internet. Folks seeing technologies move much more quickly. And I think in the beginning, our focus really was on those organizations that we saw needing a little bit more support and focus, particularly after COVID, when we realized that, okay, we might have an innovation or an idea that we need to get to this particular group of folks. We don't have access to those people. Who has access to those people, right? So now it's community-based organizations. Maybe it's also bringing in your drugstores, right? Bringing in CVS, right? We might not have thought about how to engage them when thinking about healthcare research, but now had to start thinking about them. So those were some of the organizations that we focused on in the beginning. Also thought a lot about geographic diversity, and then folks that had the capabilities that aligned with ARPA-H. So if you're in the healthcare innovation ecosystem, right? We've got payers, folks that are in the financing realm, but are also looking to expand or continue their work in the healthcare innovation space. Obviously, a lot of the research that's being done in the United States is being done at the larger academic research institutions, and so bringing them in as well, but also the smaller research institutions. So again, some of the best ideas and innovations come from some of those non-R01 research institutions that are doing research, but maybe not at a particular level, but still have brilliant researchers there that have not been successful, maybe getting some of your SBIR funding and other types of funding. We look to engage those institutions as well. So alignment again with healthcare innovation, willingness to work with the federal government, and also those who have had some reluctance there. Also now looking to bring in folks that have very specific capabilities. So, folks in the digital health space, it's obviously like a very hot area. AI, is also a space that ARPA-H is looking for folks that have these particular areas of expertise and capabilities that, again, may not run an entire program themselves, but they would be able to add their capabilities to a project. And again, these are questions like, what if your joints could heal themselves? And what if we could 3D print hearts, right? These are questions that no one institution or organization could solve. So we're looking to bring in organizations that have a bit of expertise or a connection to a particular community that the federal government has been unsuccessful in reaching or engaging in the past, that you have unique capabilities or partnerships. That's also key, because I think what's also happened over time is that, as I mentioned before, folks are used to seeing the usual suspects when they look at who's getting funding, but how to engage the usual suspects, right? How do we connect folks that don't have the access that maybe, this isn't being recorded, but Johns Hopkins, okay? I can say that because they're spoke, but people are used to saying, oh, there's Johns Hopkins again. Well, how can we connect you with Johns Hopkins? And maybe start to fill in some of the gaps that we're seeing in their projects that ARPA-H is looking for. So again, anyone in that space, anyone that has those unique capabilities and willingness to partner with other organizations to get some of these problems solved is what we're looking for.
And I'll also speak from experience with us being the spoke. There's more to this and it's easier than it seems, right? Because you guys do such a good job. Every month there's a webinar, hours long, breaking down how to work together, what to do, how to build, constant emails, constant communication, private hubs. It's not like other programs where you have to just figure it out on your own, or it's like this super secret funding no one knows until the check's cut. It's been changed, the status quo of that. So I want to go into a little bit around funding limitations. There are some rules in terms of research funding to me. What are some of those restrictions or limitations that can come into play when funding research? Are there any things that people need to look out for? Is it pretty simple?
Yeah, so I think we kind of talked a little bit about that. For example, a small research team may not have the know-how, right, and the infrastructure to work with an ARPA-H big problem, right, big challenge that they've set forth. And so that funding is not available for that smaller, nimble team, as opposed to the bigger team, which may have trouble working together, right, which is what ARPA is trying to solve. And so I think there's opportunities at every level, whether it's a super team or a small team, or sites, right? So how do we involve non-traditional, government-funded sites who are maybe doing really interesting things, but they're not what the NIH is typically funding. The other thing is the topic, and I think I alluded to, trust and communication, right? You're never going to find that topic funded at an NIH study section, right? And so there's opportunities, I think, particularly for philanthropy, to address some of these barriers that kind of fall between the gaps. I can tell you the investigators that do clinical trials in cancer that I know across the country, they're all afraid to do telehealth because they don't think their institution can do it. They don't think their clinical trials office is ready for it. They don't feel supported. They're scared to do it. And so one of the things that the Gateway Foundation has done is an initial workshop, right, to talk about, here's 2 examples of telehealth. Do it. Go do it. Right? We want to train you how to do it. We want to show you it's feasible. And that's also an area that the NIH isn't going to fund, right? It's not a traditional basic science topic. It's a translational gap. It's a barrier from here to here. We know how to do this. Let's implement it. It's sort of an implementation problem. So I think the implementation research is hard to fund, and it's not something that PhDs and NIH study sections score favorably. It's just not something they like, and they've been part of these study sections, and and I can see the things that we traditionally fund, but I think we have to go outside the box and address these other gaps. So I think an ask that I would put out to you is be part of this vision of telehealth and clinical research, whether it's cancer, cardiology. We can do this. This is not rocket science. We just have to do it. And I think I'm proud to be part of Gateway's team to help them bring this to other cancer researchers. In a couple of years, I want to see 20 more trials doing this. And they need funding, they need training, they need support. And then I want to see twice as many or 10 times as many. Maybe she can help me think in that regard. It's a big solution to get there, but there's no reason why we can't do that. So.
And another thing you talk about is what you said, which is really critical. We experience this in all areas of business, is the actual organizational culture. Change management is a huge part of innovation, because I think a lot of times we keep funding things, but we fund them and do the same thing we've always done. So how do you create change without change management, right? So that's one of the biggest things I think is a challenge, but also an opportunity. So I want to kind of speak to management on that.
What you're describing, your physician sciences leaders have no know-how on how to do. And our administrators don't know that either. So I think that's another opportunity. That's a business mind that you just described. I've never seen that at an academic medical center in that way. Right? So how do you change that culture for clinical trials? That's the problem we face everywhere.
Yeah, and that's the role you're trying to play here, right? So I want to speak to that a little bit, right? So change management from the financial investment perspective, because you have to change the culture of a family to want to do that, especially when the kids take over. So let's start off here with change management and the idea of, from a family office perspective, or someone pitching to you. How do you approach that? And is there a culture shift in venture philanthropy?
Absolutely. So you think about, I'll speak from a personal example again in Colorado, University Connections, UNIVERCITY Connections. How do you bring the city and the university together to solve issues in our community? And it was a family office. Nothing brings people together and starts changing the behavior like putting money in the middle of the table. And so it was our local community foundation funded through an anonymous family member who said, here's $1 million. We want the leadership from the university and the leadership of the city to come together and break down silos and think about how do we address issues of climate change, healthcare access, affordable housing, arts and entertainment, mobility in our communities. And here's how that works. This was 2007. I was the first director in 2008 for 2 years. One of our projects, our renewable systems, distributed systems integration project around energy, was featured in the Smithsonian as a place of innovation because silos were broke down and people changed their behaviors to say, together we're better, and there's opportunities for funding to address these issues. And it's those types of opportunities in the role of the family office to use philanthropy as a catalyst to bring people together, to work together, and create leverage for change in our communities.
And that's important, right? And there's one more piece to that too, and it's really the role when you take funding from these individuals is being clear, right? Clear with your intentions. Don't just go asking for a check. See how that person can fit into the story, and what's the personal connection there? Because that's what's worked for us. I mean, I think all of us came together because of cancer stories. My dad, Dante's parents, and your close family friends. And it just became something that was more than about money. It was, we all have the same pain, and we have that level of empathy, and how can we use our resources to create change? So I think you have to have both a financial mind, but also an empathetic heart in this type of work. But it should be that way in any form of work. I don't care if you're creating an entertainment product or a social tool, there's a human involved in the user experience. And that's where we work, right? Is how do we do these things to create change management culture? Because I'm not in the healthcare space. I am a high school and college dropout that somehow made it. It worked. But I'm here, and I never in my life thought that I would be trying to make an impact in solving cancer. But it's amazing, and it's all about vision alignment. And now let's talk about taking that energy into where you say it doesn't exist in that clinical world. How do you bring this culture and energy into those institutes to create the culture that you say doesn't exist? Like, what's been the barrier?
So communication, right? And just laying out what we're trying to get to. I keep offering this vision. Telehealth can deliver trials. And I think that for us has been the first step in this change in our culture. And then all the other things have come along. How are we going to do that? What are our resources that we need that are unique to this? What are the barriers? Who do we need to communicate with? Regulatory offices, and so just really thoroughly going through that. We shouldn't do this in silos, right? And so Ohio State is doing this, and Washington University is doing this. Does this have to happen from scratch every single time at every other cancer center in the country, or every smaller practice? So how do we have a larger impact? And that's where we want to go. We want this to be a training opportunity. We want this to be disseminated. And I could use some help.
And I do. Let's think about cultural alignment and thinking about change management and culture. As you guys are bringing so many organizations together and driving this collaboration, there's these pages that they have. It's called teaming. which is really cool. So like if an organization comes on as a spoke, not only do they talk about their disciplines and areas where they have expertise, but they'll also talk about their needs. So how has that gone so far? I know things are new, but is there change management needs, or is the integration of different institutions gone smoothly? How does that work?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. It's something that, the Investor Catalyst Hub is really focused on. One of our main roles is actually being a facilitator of matchmaking. I think that some of those smaller institutions, or institutions, again, that have not normally engaged with the federal government, are saying, hey, we have this component, we can help you manage your data, or we can help in this very specific way. We are not sure how to go in on a proposal together. We're actually not sure how to do that, or what role we need to play in the proposal. We are in a completely geographically, separate location. Does that matter? Some of those things. And so, yes, we have, had matchmaking sessions, and we've also been able to facilitate matchmaking with, I think, some of what we've talked about before. Folks not actually knowing what to do, even if they receive this money. Like, well, what they would actually do, how they would, day to day manage these funds and meet these milestones. And so we've been able to facilitate groups being able to connect with organizations that do that as well. But I think that just talking about that overall cultural change that needs to take place, I think that it's something that the ARPAs really focus on. It's really like an overhaul of thinking of how we approach problems, right? It's not you in your lab, coming up with this great cool thing, and you're focused on this really cool molecule that's really only cool to you. But then you are saying, hey, government, give me money for this thing. And really flipping that and saying, these are the things that we've identified as problems. This is a huge problem. Who around the United States can help us solve this problem? And so I think that the cultural shift, it's happening. I think that it's going to have to trickle down even earlier, right? At the university level, to the postdoc level, to the research graduate student, down to the undergrad, down to K through 12, right? To where we're thinking about solving problems and not a competitive nature, and that we are collaborative from the beginning, right? I think that it really, really has contributed to us not being able to solve problems in a faster, cheaper way, because we are reinventing the wheel so many times over, and we're not able to actually come together and see where we can fill in gaps for one another. And so that is why the matchmaking component is very important. And I think that what ARPA-H is looking for in building this network is being able to expedite some of these solutions. And so the program managers that come up with these programs are tenured. They have a 2-year opportunity to come up with a problem, create a program, and then if that goes well, they can extend to 4 to 6 years. And that's to keep new programs coming through at any time, right? You're not having people that are there till they retire. You're having new ideas come in, maybe new partners that are going to come in to try to work with them. And that's a different approach than what we've seen at NIH or DoD or NSF with other programs. And so I think being able to think about the ways that we can work together and facilitate matchmaking on a project level, but also start to ingrain that in our graduate students, undergrads, and our K through 12 students that are scientists, not business students, right? They didn't go to business school, so they don't have that background, but that are thinking about their innovation and their discovery in a collaborative way, from a very early age.
And I think it also, some of us in the room are backgrounds in corporate venture and just venture in general. This is very similar to the reverse pitch model. That's where we started with Immersion, and we would go to cities or corporations and say, what challenges are you having? And those individuals speak to the problems that they have, and they teach you how to sell to them, right? And what solutions are needed, because I think that there's less pull and more push in that way, right? And now you're building for a need, and you have a funder and an outcome buyer before you even invest. It's like, if you can succeed at this, you'll get the money. Okay, great. And that's one thing I really love about the ARPA strategy, is that you get to know the need up front, which is a very rare thing. Now let's talk about change management in the data side of things, We talk about this all the time. Heather, you and I are just happy and frustrated sometimes. It's really cool what we're doing. And I'd love to talk about that because the data part is literally gold, right? Because what I've learned from this is you can do a clinical trial in one use case, have good findings for another, but you have to run it again in that use case for it to be accepted in like NCCN guidelines. So you start thinking about data compliance, data similarities across organizations, that's so tough, right? So what role does change management play in the data component of research?
So I'm going to age myself by saying this, but it wasn't in my mind that long ago that every patient's chart was on paper and in a file cabinet in the doctor's office, and they would request it and get the chart right. And that patient's data was not shared in any way, shape, or form beyond that paper chart in that cabinet. And we've come to this point today where in the years from going from paper charts and cabinets to fully electronic health medical records, there have been a lot of additions to medicine. There have been genomics testing and genomics labs added into cancer. There has been a myriad of treatments and treatment options and even treatment modalities that have been built. Different testing services and testing aids available. The internet changes everything, and the ability for patients to go online and look up information and be more educated. All of these things, from paper charts and cabinets to where we are today, now means that we went from no data being shared to so much data being shared. How do we even begin to look at it? How do we even think about using it? It's overwhelming, it's confusing, and none of it matches together or is in the same format. And so when we talk about change management in data, it's twofold, right? It's starting back at the early stages of making sure that, not even talking about research, that the physician within a clinic who's seeing a patient today in their office has the right information at hand and isn't feeling overwhelmed or unable to find what they need because there's too much data. And so we need to structure data, we need to clean data, we need to organize data, and we need to make it useful and usable so that the amount of data being used isn't exactly the same as it was when we had paper charts. Because it can be very easy to get to that point because it's so overwhelming. And then from a research perspective, there is a way of looking at data from failed research and from successful research. And taking both failures and successes and putting those together, you can really determine what the next steps need to be. But again, you have to look at the right data. And so from a change management perspective, I think going from these mountains and mountains of data that we're sifting through and hoping can be useful that are in different sources, and really creating a uniform data set across all data sources, that gives us an edge in medicine, that gives us an edge in research that we currently don't have that needs to be addressed. And so that's my mission and my vision and my goal, and something that I'm working towards. And I think it's a difficult thing to ask of people. Sharing data is not always the most pleasant thing to talk about. I think there's a bit of the ownership is mine. I don't want anyone else to see it. But you see projects out there, the AACR Biopharma Collaborative, Project Genie out there, where they're creating uniform data sets, and we're working as a part of that as well to build common data models so that data can be shared across sites. This is a novel approach that previously has not been done, and that's where we need to get to if we're going to advance research. And honestly, it's where we need to get to if we're going to solve health disparities, because all of that data for diverse patients is sitting in a warehouse, a data warehouse, not even being used today. And we need to find ways to make that more useful. And then I really quick also just want to say that when we talk about the decentralized trials and we talk about bringing clinical trials to more diverse patient populations, that data could not be more crucial. Without it, we cannot match patients to clinical trials. We cannot take a protocol for a clinical trial and take a patient's data and say this patient matches this protocol. They live, in Alabama and the trial is being run in Ohio, but we can still get this patient on the trial. Without that data being available and access to that data, how do we make that happen? So that's the goal that we're working towards. It's something that needs to happen. We have to be successful in this mission.
And from a venture perspective, one of the things that I've learned from just my broad little experience is our team is, we work with so many different organizations, we get to kind of have a bird's eye view of everything. And the data component plays another role. And when you think about financial modeling, which many of you work with me, you probably get sick of me because I'm the most anal person with numbers. But what reason I'm that way is because when you do early signaling and I start to understand and analyze what the opportunity is, you set early data sets then, and then you actually get paid on those outcomes. Because no smart investor, especially in this space, is going to be all money at once. It's not going to happen. It's going to be tranche-based or outcome-based payouts. So you may be awarded $20 million or $10 million, but you're not getting that check at one time. It's over 3-5 years. And if you don't act in a certain way or hit a certain goal, they'll swap you out, right? Or drop you out. So I think that really early on, challenging yourself to set the criteria of success and measurements is so critical. And that's going to create safety and psychological safety in all those participating. Because with that data collection, outcome measurement, and the financial model, everybody knows where they win and how much they win.
Way, we put forth $10 million, our investigators will come. So we get 125 applications for researchers across the country developing trials. They're afraid to do telehealth. We can show them how to do that. We can train them to do it. But you put that $10 million there, we might see 10 clinical trials in the next year come forth from that. And I think that, and like you said, in tranches, but I think that's a neat opportunity. And Gateway is set up to do that. They're really leading the field. There's no other organization purposefully sponsoring and promoting telehealth clinical trials. There's no organization doing that like this. The NIH isn't doing that. I'm not sure if ARPA-H is doing that yet. We should. But I think that's what I'm really most proud of and excited about. And one of the things we say at Gateway is first and always about the patient, right? And that's why we're here today to share this story with you.
And so I'll go to you next, thinking about your greatest success moment you've seen in this, maybe some of the things like Mike Freeman and some of the funds you guys have put together. What's your greatest example of philanthropic and innovation be successful?
Relationships. So we've already started to form a relationship right here just with this panel. And Immersion is the hub, and Gateway and City of Hope. I mean, it's just the ability to sit down and talk about what could be if we work together. And so a great example is my good dear friend, Mike Freeman, who's the CEO of our statewide technology incubator in Colorado called iiCare. And it's for clean tech, bioscience, and software. He has pulled together through relationship building, coffee, cocktails, wearing out the shoe leather, driving to meet with all of the university partners, with all of the funders. I helped him build out our funding community to say, what is possible? How do we work better together? And the result of that is what we've seen here, a $160 million National Science Foundation grant. Now it comes with strings attached, with tranches. You've got to be able to deliver. And why my challenge to our family office community to fund the infrastructure that enables this to happen, this collaborative infrastructure. But it happened. But he's a 10-year overnight success because of the time that it takes to build relationships. And unfortunately with cancer, time is not on our side. And so the sooner we can start building these relationships and thinking about how can we build better together. And Nathan, what you said is so key. How do we invite the family office in? Oftentimes we're approached by people seeking funding. They've got very clear requests in mind. And I would invite you to set those requests aside and invite the family office in and say, how could we do this together? I'm bringing a quiver of multiple arrows of philanthropic money, venture money, investment money. A good example, we've got a family who owns hotels, a chain of hotels around the nation, setting aside rooms next to key research facilities to enable clinical trials and for family members. It's that I can bring time, talent, and treasure from my family office. So relationships, relationships, relationships.
And that's so important. I mean, even how I got to where I am today, and any of you have known me since my youth, it was a byproduct of amazing families seeing something in me that I didn't even see in myself. I was like 19 years old, and I started taking historical properties owned by families and breathing new life into them. Now you go walk to the Deer District and you can see what we've done. That should have never happened for someone like me, but through families understanding their needs and allowing them to take your talents into the family, it changes you. It allows you to leave your ego at the door and just do good work. And that's what's so important. So build those relationships, but like you said, don't come in with your perspective all the time, right? Because you just may not have seen enough. And even if you've seen a lot, there's always more. So always come in with the goal of collaboration and not just agenda pushing. Look for people to be able to see themselves in your dream and not allow it to just be your dream alone. Breathe their dreams to life through you as a catalyst. Mind you, your greatest success that you've seen in the work that you do, that's something that you'd be proud to speak of.
Yeah, great question, and I've learned a lot from all of you, so thank you. I think, the most recent program that's run through VentureWell and the Investor Catalyst Hub is the Sprint for Women's Health, which is an initiative by First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, and really trying to reshape how people think about women's health. And not just because I'm a woman, but because I'm a person. I think it's really interesting the way that historically medicine has approached women's health as, like we're just small men, basically, and really having a concerted focus around, areas that not only concern women, but just at least having that spotlight on the ways they affect women, right? So whether you're talking about oncology or heart health, all of these different areas of overall health affect women differently. And so it was just very inspiring to see all of the overwhelming amount of interest from not only, women-owned or women-led companies that are in, so-called the femtech or feminine health space, but from all areas of clinical and diagnostic research, really looking at how these innovations affect women. So even we're past the pitch phase, and so we're looking forward to awardees being announced in the fall. But I'd say that's one of our one of the wins that we can count on the Investor Catalyst Hub side, because we did run that sprint. Hopefully there will be more sprints to come that will run through the hub as well. And keep an eye out for to see who those awardees are, who are all spokes in the Investor Catalyst Hub network.
And that's $100 million, I believe that was?
The sprint, yes, 100, over, I think it might be 150.
Yeah, 150. So you think about a lot of these programs, I mean, there's billions and billions of dollars going into these things, and that's what it takes. I mean, you literally are making a bet on an outcome, but when it succeeds, the data shows that every dollar invested in health disparities returns $5 to the community, and I'll explain a little bit why. The burden of health on the economy in the U.S. is $980 million a year in just in healthcare issues that could have been avoided through education alone, right? So that's greater than the growth of the GDP of our market. So we are literally the greatest burden and drag on the economy is just uneducated health, right? And how can we just start there? And then we start thinking about the other piece of the return. Now you start thinking about job creation, new opportunities, and all the other ancillary benefits of what happens when you start injecting capital in this space. And it's really, really amazing. But think every $100 million, there's $500 million of value being created that goes into this. Talk about something that you're proud of, one of your greatest successes.
Yeah, so I won't say the name of the institution since we're being recorded. I won't make the mistake. No, I'm just kidding. So a very, very large, very well-known cancer institute in the U.S. Had come to us and had over 10 years of cancer data that was unusable. And the data was so unorganized that the physicians couldn't do any research with it. It was not being used to answer patient questions individually when they were in the office. And it wasn't effectively being used even for clinical trials in cases where it had been generated for clinical trial use. And we took that over 10 years worth of data and we completely organized, cleaned, and curated it in under a year. And made it usable to the point where it not only impacted how they treat patients at the cancer center, it impacted the research publications that the Institute was putting out. It was auditable, repeatable, usable data that really made their publications come out faster and more accurate, and they had a pretty substantial uptick in publication approvals. We also saw better clinical trial data entry from this clean data and better patient outcomes, because what was happening is that we were now able to give them data that they could essentially type in anything that they wanted to search, and it was able to query even the unstructured progress notes and answer questions. And for those of you who know, the unstructured progress notes holds the dearest, most valuable data, and is the hardest to structure and the hardest to use. And we were able to take even those unstructured notes and clean those up. And so I'm very proud of that. Over 10 years of data now being used on a daily basis for a multitude of purposes.
And the thing that makes that super exciting too is you start to put those inputs in, you start thinking about how generative AI plays a role, and it's through data inputs and natural language processing. So as you aggregate data in a HIPAA compliant, you start to create a more intuitive platform, right? So AI will never get to where it needs to be without having the right structure when the data is being input, and then trying to figure out how to remove like unconscious, conscious bias within that. But I appreciate you all. I want to give a round of applause for all the speakers. It's time to join us today. Thank you guys so much. And then I'm going to welcome Natalie to the stage in a little bit, just to say a little bit about Gateway and Broward.
Sure.
So Natalie's one of the most significant people in my life. She's not shy at all, so I don't know where she's pretending. No, so there was this moment, we were sitting down and we were having a meeting about what Gateway was doing. We were like, hey, how can we drive innovation? And I was sitting with my partner and we brought up that his mom was in stage 4 and it was some things that we wanted to do to make an outcome, to make a difference. And Natalie stopped the meeting immediately. She didn't care about nothing we had to say. She said, boom. Next day, Dante's mom was in the car getting the best care of Ohio State, rocking with me. So I think that really for us, it's been just a beautiful experience working with Gateway. So I just thank you guys, because if it wasn't for Gateway, this whole thing wouldn't even be rolling the way that it is. You created a platform for us to be able to do this. So please say a little bit about Gateway and the mission, because that is the driving force of this.
Great, thanks Nathan. I just want to also thank our panelists on behalf of Gateway for, I know it was a challenge, right, to get here. We have to go through checkpoints and security, not the easiest symposium to get to. So thank you all for doing that, going out of your way. We know how important it is when our clinician scientists leave their patients for a day, so thank you so much to all of you. I'll just be really brief. Gateway for Cancer Research exists to fund phase 1 and phase 2 cancer clinical trials, and what that really means is it is the first in-human studies. At the same time, we're privately funded, so I also look at the kind of distinguished panel that we had today, and one of the things that popped out to me was collaboration versus competition, and that's what we're all about. We ultimately, at the end of the day, want to find a cure to cancer. At the very same time, and I know everyone says they're recording, Big Pharma's not going to give us money for phase 1 and phase 2 cancer clinical trials. High risk, high reward, but without phase 1 and phase 2, there is no 3 or 4. There is no FDA funding. So we're working together with iiCare, which is under the Immersion umbrella, to look at cancer health disparities trials. So we're in the process right now of raising $1.5 million, which will ultimately lead to a clinical trial with the right cohort of diversity in clinical trials. The barriers to that are a lot with underserved communities, areas, and ethnicity groups. So at the same time, we partnered with another organization called Lazarex, who will provide the non-medical expenses. So as Samik said, you diagnose, you have a loved one with you, you need somebody else there with you, you are traveling a lot. So, at the end of the day, Gateway exists to fund phase 1 and phase 2. We are we are always and only about the patient. We don't care about making money, sorry Nate, with the commercialization of anything else. We care about finding cures for cancer and helping patients live longer, have more memories with their loved ones, get to watch your daughter walk down the aisle, see your next grandchild born. That's what we're all about. We want to be able to take this, partner together, because we truly do believe collaboration is the key. The partnerships that we have with our grantees, the partnership that we have with iiCare. So that's kind of the top level, and I don't like talking, so thanks.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate you. Thanks for your time. And obviously, we're going to kind of wrap up. In closing, is talk about some ways you guys can kind of collaborate with us. So we are about funding trials in a variety of different areas. We're doing a cannabis trial. We're doing minority disadvantaged trials. We can do all kinds of different things, but at the end of the day, the mission is always the same, is to help people. So this is just a blessing to be able to do this in the period of time that we've been able to do it. And every reason, it's all been family offices. That'd be Lazarex, Gateway. These are individuals that took millions of dollars out of their own pockets with no goal, with no fear or favor, to just make a difference. And it's just been so crazy to just be a part of the journey. So thank you all for being able to help us to do this. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And if you guys have anything you guys want to learn from us, please take the time. We're going to have some cocktails in a little bit. But thank you so much.